essentially, when a legislative proposal is made by the Commission, it is sent to the Council, which is comprised of the Member States. There's every Member State sits the Council and the Parliament, and they're the co-legislators. So the Parliament then appoints a rapporteur or rapporteurs, depending on whether it's one committee or more than one committee is determined to be appropriate to examine the legislation, and that rapporteur guides the legislation through the Parliament as it determines its position on the legislation, and whatever amendments are deemed appropriate, or even if it's deemed appropriate to accept or to reject the legislative proposal from the Commission. This particular proposal is around revising the AI Act. The AI Act was passed in 2024 to regulate AI. It's, I suppose, proven somewhat controversial because it's very much at odds with the approach favoured by the current U.S. administration. And his first trip abroad, American Vice President J.D. Vance sort of questioned whether there was any need at all for regulation in AI. And the approach there has been very much towards deregulation in the tech sector, at least at a national level. But of course, some of the states in America are proceeding with their own legislation. In Europe, we have this AI legislation, but it requires part of it to come into effect next August on high-risk activities, and that would involve member states looking very closely and scrutinising those high-risk activities, for example, education, health, etc. But many member states are ill-prepared for what they have to do, and it is proposed to delay the implementation of that. But I suppose at the same time as this is happening, the importance of legislation and safeguards in AI have become very apparent with regard to, in particular, nudification apps, where people are generating fake images of a sexualized nature of adults, but even also of children. And while the dissemination of images may be illegal, it certainly is illegal when it comes to children, as is the creation of such images. It's not so clear-cut when it comes to adults. And I would be proposing that the legislation address this as part of this revision of the.
Yeah, and I suppose you mentioned US Vice President J.D. Vance, a kind of almost adverseness to this, and the same was said of Elon Musk, where he thought that any sort of restriction on Grok was censorship or limitation of free speech.
Yeah, but I mean, do I have a right to express myself by making a sexualized image of you for my gratification? Is that freedom of expression? I mean, I'd be interested to hear from various actors in that, and I'm sure we will do as part of the legislative process. But I mean, there are obviously limitations on freedom of speech, but certainly, the question is me making a naked image of another person without their consent, is that expression? I mean, what exactly am I expressing by that? Or what is it that I want to express, and is it something that I should be allowed to do without that other person's consent? I mean, of course, I'm free to distribute images of myself undressed. Not that I can't imagine I find too many people interested in having such images, but I mean, arguably that might be an expression of free speech, but I mean, when it's of other people without their consent, it's a different matter.
And I suppose there has been at least some sort of positive development in this in the last day or so, in terms of the nudification mode has been blocked in Ireland, but that's just one platform. There's plenty more smaller platforms than Grok that probably still have this ability in terms of generation of images.
Indeed, and I mean, I suppose the whole purpose of the AI Act was to ensure kind of uniformity across the EU, that we'd have a single market, and this would have similar rules across the EU with regard to AI and the use of AI. So, in a way, if anything, this shows the need for uniformity in the EU, that we'd have a similar approach taken across every country, because there isn't, I suppose, a huge amount of point in an activity being lawful in one member state and unlawful down the road in another. It's an area where I think there's considerable benefits from uniform legislation.
And is the American influence, particularly in the area of AI, is that something that's difficult to either deal with or even overcome when it comes to legislation such as this?
Well, I mean, there are some who claim that this legislation is very much driven by pressures from the pressures from the big tech companies, which of course are almost all based in the United States. Many of them, of course, have their European headquarters in Ireland, but their worldwide headquarters is in the United States in almost all instances, and they very much have the ear of the current administration. However, member states, including Ireland, I suppose, are also calling for a delay in the implementation of this, that they're not quite ready to implement the Act, and that they haven't, in many instances, put the bodies in place that will be required to implement the Act. Now, Ireland, while it's among those countries that are calling for a delay in the implementation, is far more advanced in its preparations than many other member states.
Yeah, and I suppose
one would expect that Ireland would be, given the presence of the large tech companies in Ireland and their importance to the Irish economy.
And I suppose you mentioned, even you're looking at advancements, that the advancements AI itself has made in the last couple of years. I suppose you have to really make sure that you're keeping on top of this legislation that's developing at the same time that the power of AI is as well.
Yeah, I mean that's very much the challenge, and I mean arguably it's moving so quickly that it is hard for legislation to stay on top of it. I mean, legislation, I suppose, isn't there necessarily to stay on top of it, but it is there to ensure that risks are mitigated, and that and that society is protected from some of the harmful effects. Undoubtedly, of course, there are many benefits that come from it too, including increased productivity in many sectors, but there are disadvantages, and it's important. And I suppose this whole Grok episode has highlighted one of them. I mean, there's also reports of chatbots that encourage suicidal ideation in children, and sort of have there are various court cases in the United States where children were encouraged to self-harm and indeed to commit suicide, and there are court cases ongoing being brought by their parents. Again, this is something that's being tackled in the United States itself by the FTC, the Fair Trade Commission there, and it's something that needs to be looked at this side of the Atlantic as well.